Hey there, wake up. It's Means Morning News. Just after 11 a.m. on the East Coast in Washington, D.C., this is that source for anti-capitalist news and analysis, and I'm that host, Sam Sachs. Good morning to everyone, especially all the puppies out there. Did you know it's National Puppy Day? Yeah, so give that little guy a treat and a squeeze from me, the newsman. Big fan of puppies over here. Huge fan. And we begin on Capitol Hill. The CEO of Moderna, Stefan Bancel, defended his company's decision to jack up the price of its COVID vaccine while he was testifying before the Senate on Wednesday. Bancel was grilled by Senator Bernie Sanders, the chairman of the Senate Health, Education, Labor, and Pension Committee, about the gross profit seeking.
You're a multi-billionaire. Or the people, top executives in your company are multi-billionaires, all developed as a result of the vaccine. And now we have a situation where you are proposing to quadruple the price of the vaccine once the government stockpile runs out. That will mean that not only, and we'll talk about later on the patient assistance program, but in terms of government, in terms of Medicare, Medicaid, other government agencies, taxpayers are going to have to spend substantially more money. My question to you is, given the fact that you have made billions of dollars, that your company has made huge profits, on behalf of the taxpayers of this country, will you reconsider your decision to quadruple the price of the vaccine?
So, Chairman Sanders, what we have to do is to deal with the complexity I described, and I'm happy to go into more detail for this hearing. This is not the same product. We used to have 10 doses in each vial. Now we're going to have every vial will have a different dose. This is not the same.
I understand it, but quadrupling the price is huge, and I would hope very much that you will reconsider that decision. It's going to cost the taxpayers of this country billions of dollars. Is that something you can do?
The volume we had during the pandemic gave us economies of scale we won't have anymore. That is why it's different.
That's a no. Bancel's argument is that since the government is no longer their main customer, they won't be able to sell as many doses, and also the company will have to produce more doses than is likely needed, and so they have to raise the price by 400% to cover any losses. That's coming from a company that received billions of dollars in public investment and research to develop the vaccine, and that has raked in $21 billion in profits since the vaccine came online in late 2020. Sanders also noted during the hearing that Bancel himself became a billionaire overnight thanks to Moderna's COVID vaccine and the bonuses and stock options he was awarded as CEO. So it's not that Moderna needs to raise the price to cover any losses. It needs to raise the price to ensure it can keep lavishing its executives and shareholders with more fortunes. But let's not forget that the Biden administration also shares some of the blame here. Its decision to commercialize the COVID response gave more power to private companies to price gouge. And that's what we're seeing now. If you don't have insurance, you'll be denied access to COVID vaccines and treatments. And if you do have health insurance, expect your premiums to rise in order to cover the costs of these now more expensive COVID vaccines. That's just the cost of letting profit seekers control our healthcare system. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis is already getting pummeled by former President Donald Trump in what is likely considered the first round of attacks in a GOP presidential primary. Now, DeSantis hasn't officially announced he's running for president yet, but everyone knows he is. And rather than fighting back against Trump personally, DeSantis is trying to prove his value to the Republican Party in a different way by making life hell for LGBTQ plus people in his state. It was reported on Wednesday that DeSantis plans to extend the recently passed Don't Say Gay law, which prohibits any teaching of sexual orientation and gender identity in kindergarten through third grade, not just teaching, but any discussion period of it, to now cover all students in Florida schools all the way up through 12th grade. in effect preventing gay students and teachers from openly discussing their own lives, and in some cases, the lives of their spouses or parents. Expanding the Don't Say Gay law to cover high schoolers can be done by a simple vote among DeSantis' appointees in the Florida Education Department. Although the law was originally sold as a way to ensure that only age-appropriate material is taught in school, it's clear now that this has always been an effort to target kids and teachers and erase LGBTQ+ identities. Florida is also among 8 states in the country that have banned gender-affirming healthcare for young transgender people. A new report by the Human Rights Campaign finds that more than 1 out of every 5 trans kids in the U.S. now live in a state where they are denied the health care they need. The group noted that nearly 24 states are considering similar measures, and if approved, then 50% of trans kids in the country risk losing access to gender-affirming care and could be forced to detransition. And some states are trying to target trans adults, too. Oklahoma, Texas, and South Carolina are considering bans on individuals up to 26 years old. I really don't think enough people have woken up yet to what's happening here. First, they came for the trans kids. And finally, more celebrities were busted by the Securities and Exchange Commission for hawking crypto online without disclosing that they were being paid to do so. Chinese crypto mogul Justin Sun is the primary focus of the agency's enforcement actions. He's been charged with running an unregistered crypto exchange and for manipulating markets with wash trading. The influencers Sun paid to promote his tokens online are also targets of the SEC. An agency press release on Wednesday named 8 of them, including actress Lindsay Lohan, YouTuber Jake Paul, and artists Soulja Boy, Lil Yachty, Neo, and Akon. 6 out of the 8 celebrities named, including Lohan, agreed to a settlement to pay a total of $400,000 in fines. This is just the latest round of famous people who fucked around and made crypto ads only to find out later and have to pay fines for those ads. Kim Kardashian, Floyd Mayweather Jr., DJ Khaled, Paul Pierce, and Steven Seagal have all been hit with SEC charges for similar schemes. And there's currently a class action lawsuit against a number of celebrities who were paid to promote FTX before the firm imploded, including Tom Brady, Steph Curry, Shaquille O'Neal, and, pains me to say this, but Larry David. Look, we all saw the ad during the Super Bowl. Sorry, Larry, but you screwed up. It was pretty bad. Pretty bad. Norfolk Southern CEO Alan Shaw appeared before a Senate committee again on Wednesday to discuss how his company is improving safety following the devastating train derailment in East Palestine earlier this year. Since the crash, the freight rail industry has scrambled to prove that it does care about improving track safety and the health of its workers. For example, a number of the top carriers have since agreed to providing portions of their workforce with paid sick leave, which was a major point of contention during last year's labor dispute that nearly led to a strike. But based on testimony given by Shaw on Wednesday, the industry, or at least Norfolk Southern, is not ready to agree to one key proposal to improve working conditions and track safety. And that's ensuring that all trains have at least 2-person crews. The requirement is anathema to the industry's strategy of precision scheduled railroading, which is based on cutting as many costs as possible, including labor costs, to ensure maximum profits. It's a strategy that is responsible for the surge in derailments over the last decade. Turns out, if you cut crews to the bone and forego track maintenance, trains tend to crash more. Lawmakers introduced legislation after East Palestine that would require 2-person crews on all freight trains. And here was Shaw getting asked by Senator Ed Markey if he would support such a rule.
Will you commit to supporting legislation requiring at least 2-person crews on all freight trains?
Senator, we'll commit to using research and technology to ensure the railroad operates safely.
Will you commit to a 2-person crew on all trains?
Senator, we're a data-driven organization, and I'm not aware of any data that links crew size with safety.
Do you disagree with Mr. Whitaker when he says that it would have been far worse? His testimony is loud and clear. It would have been worse if there's only one person as a crew on that train. Do you disagree with him?
Senator, I believe that we have operations infrastructure on the ground to respond to derailments.
Yeah, well, the point is to prevent the derailments in the first place, dipshit. And labor unions and regulators both agree that two-person crews are safer, that people can respond better than robots when a problem arises, especially as trains get longer and more difficult to control. Of course, the ultimate goal of the industry is to have zero-person crews, to automate most freight rail operations and further reduce labor costs and maximize profits. And we can't let them win. Hey, it's a special Thursday edition of Rich Dicks. The team has the day off tomorrow, so we're taking the trash out today. Thanks for the nominations on social media. People put forward French President Emmanuel Macron, liberal austerity hawk Larry Summers, dipshit Chicago mayoral candidate Paul Vallis, the CEO of Moderna, and, of course, all the goddamn landlords. Thank you for that one, Rona. All very strong nominations, but ultimately, this week's Rich Dick is New York Times op-ed columnist Stephen Ratner. In addition to barfing out columns for the Times, Ratner is also a Wall Street financier and is the chairman of an investment firm that manages billionaire Michael Bloomberg's fortune. The bio is enough to give this guy Rich Dick dishonors, but on top of all that, he also wrote one of the worst op-eds of the week, titled, "Is Working from Home Really Working?" In it, Ratner claims that Americans have lost their work ethic since COVID, and their aversion to coming into the office will do long-lasting economic damage. To make the case, Ratner touches on a number of buzzwords that capitalists have thrown in the debate to denigrate workers, such as quiet quitting and the so-called Great Resignation. He writes, quote, "The question lurking in the minds of many with whom I've spoken, as well as my own, has America gone soft?" This coming from a guy who looks like this and whose job it is to move money around for Michael Bloomberg, whose hardest part of the day is waking up early to ham it up with Joe Scarborough on MSNBC. You might wonder who exactly Ratner is speaking with to arrive at this conclusion that workers have gone soft. Well, he tells us. Senior executives. Quote, "Every senior executive of the several dozen with whom I've discussed this issue believes that operating from home is simply less productive than being in the office." Now, let's just be clear about what's happening here. Workers haven't gone soft since COVID. What's happened is they finally understood their worth, especially the workers who were deemed essential. And what they realized is they aren't compensated enough to risk their lives to show up at work during a pandemic. That's the opposite of going soft. That's flexing their class power. But I can see how capitalists might get confused. In many industries like freight rail and healthcare, workers have been forced to labor even harder to make up for companies doing mass layoffs. No one is going soft here. And when it comes to remote work, it should be encouraged whenever possible. We're in the midst of a global warming crisis in which as many cars as possible need to be taken off the road. So let's start by getting rid of the needless commute. Now, Ratner even admits he has zero proof for any of his claims about remote work. He writes, quote, "I'll concede that apart from the shrunken labor force, hard data on the impact of new work arrangements is at best inconclusive since statistics remain distorted by COVID effects." So this is purely a vibes-based argument informed by the complaints of bosses Ratner spoke to. Despite not having any proof for any of this, Ratner goes on to allege that Silicon Valley Bank failed because, you guessed it, because of remote work. He writes, quote, "Even as COVID faded, much of the bank's leadership team remained dispersed around the country, which hindered communication and collaboration." Okay, that's just fucking stupid. This guy's just making stuff up now. If the ownership class wants people back in the office, it can simply pay their workers more, especially at a time when many corporations are enjoying record profits. But instead, you get article after article whining about how workers won't prostrate themselves before the boss anymore. And for being the latest columnist to spit one of these articles out, Stephen Ratner has earned himself the dishonors of being this week's Rich Dick. Time to consult the archives. It's This Week in Working Class History. And we begin way back in 1872 in one of the most consequential strikes in Canadian labor history. It involved thousands of print workers in Toronto who were fed up working long hours every day, so they went on a strike for a 9-hour workday. More than 10,000 people rallied on their behalf. At the time, union activity was outlawed in Canada, and organizers of the strike were jailed. People then took to the streets to protest those arrests. And less than a month later, Canadian Prime Minister John A. Macdonald was pressured to act to protect organized labor. He put forward legislation that protected union organizing and strike actions, and workers in other industries started agitating for shorter workdays as well, in what became known as the 9-hour movement. Next up, 1927, when this week, that year, things popped off in China with the Third Uprising. Nearly 1 million people in Shanghai went on a general strike. A workers' militia organized by the Communist Party and trade unions seized weapons and went on the offensive against police stations and army barracks. Within a day, the working class had seized control of the city, uprooting the warlords that previously had power. Sadly, within a few weeks, Chinese nationalist forces under the command of Shanghai Shek descended on the city and massacred the communists, lighting the fuse to the Chinese Civil War. Let's fast forward now to 1974 and a pretty famous strike at a British Rolls-Royce factory that targeted the right-wing junta of Chilean dictator Augusto Pinochet. A year earlier, Pinochet seized control of Chile and murdered democratically elected socialist Salvador Allende. Workers at the Rolls-Royce factory in East Kilbride soon realized that a number of engines that came in for repair belonged to the Chilean Air Force, which was now controlled by Pinochet and was being used to target civilians and leftists. And so, the workers refused to do maintenance on the engines, grounding a chunk of Pinochet's air power and likely saving a lot of people's lives. The refusal to work lasted for almost 4 years, and the workers kept their jobs during it, thanks to support from their union. And finally, let's wrap things up in 1986 when more than 20,000 unionized support workers at 7 U.S. military bases in the Philippines went on a wildcat strike. Union leaders called for the work stoppage when negotiations over a new labor contract had collapsed. Filipino workers constructed barriers at the bases and prevented U.S. personnel from entering. UPI reported at the time, quote, strikers chanting worker power burned effigies of U.S. officials and paraded placards that read, "Don't trust dirty Americans," and "military base for rent" outside the gates of the 15,000-acre base, the largest U.S. naval facility overseas. Based. The strike lasted 12 days, but a lack of solidarity from the nearby business community that relied on U.S. soldiers put pressure on the workers to end their action before an agreement was reached. To learn more about any of these stories or other events that happened in working class history, check out the project on Twitter, listen to the podcast, and subscribe on Patreon. Back with more next week. Okay, gang, the show ends this morning with a sunrise all the way from Hawaii. It was sent in by Gina and Aaron in Honolulu. Enjoy. Thanks, Gina. Thanks, Aaron. That's the show. Thanks to the team behind the scenes. Please subscribe to our YouTube and podcast channels, and also subscribe to Means TV if you haven't already. You won't regret it. One day, capitalism will fall, Until then, we're going to be right here. The team has the day off tomorrow. See you next week.